Welcome to the AMBW Seoul Romance channel. AMBW Seoul Romance is a place for emotional, dramatic, and addictive love stories between Asian men and Black women. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories. I ruined a $20 million shipment with one sentence, and that was the moment they decided to kill me. I was halfway through a routine correction when everything went wrong. The screen in front of me blinked with a minor discrepancy, one container ID off by a single digit. It was the kind of error nobody noticed unless they had been burned before. I had been burned before, so I fixed it. That was all I intended to do that night. Fix one mistake, finish my shift, and get home before my daughter woke up asking why I was never there in the mornings. The port of Savannah never really sleeps. Steel groans, engines hum, and the air smells like salt and diesel and secrets nobody writes down. I was used to that rhythm. It kept my head down and my past buried. But then I heard it. A voice, low and controlled, coming from the conference room down the hall. The door was not fully closed. It never is when men think they own the place. I should have kept walking. I know that now. Instead, I slowed down just enough to hear the translator speak. His English was clean, polished, almost too perfect. He repeated a clause from the Korean speaker across the table, a man I recognized immediately, even though I had only seen his face in internal warnings and whispered rumors. Kang Min-jae, logistics king. Untouchable. The kind of man who moved entire ports with a phone call. The translator smiled slightly as he spoke, but what he said did not match what I heard in the original Korean. Not exactly. One word shifted. Liability became ownership. Aid became restricted cargo. It was subtle. Deadly. My stomach tightened. I checked the live manifest on my tablet, cross-referencing shipment codes from Busan flagged under humanitarian clearance. The numbers lined up too neatly. Too clean to be real. This was not a mistake. It was a setup. If Kong signed that agreement, he would be legally tied to cargo that could trigger federal seizure, maybe even criminal charges. Millions gone overnight. Maybe his entire operation. I stood there, frozen, feeling my pulse climb into my throat. This was not my job anymore. Not after what they did to me last year, pinning a data leak on my name and walking me out like I was the criminal. I had learned to stay quiet, to survive. But then the translator repeated the lie again, slower this time, like he was sealing it. Kong nodded once, calm, unreadable, reaching for the pen. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. I pushed the door open before my brain could stop me. Every head turned. The room went still. I heard my own voice cut through the air, sharper than I expected. I said the translation was wrong. I said the clause did not mean what he claimed. I corrected it, word for word, my heart hammering so loud I thought I would pass out. Silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. Khan looked at me, really looked, like he was weighing my life against something I could not see. The translator's face drained of color. And in that silence, I understood something cold and final. I had just exposed a lie that was never meant to be uncovered. They did not even wait until the meeting ended. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the air, the way conversations died the second I stepped back into the hallway. No one spoke to me. No one looked at me. The port had always been loud, alive, chaotic, but in that moment it felt like a vacuum had swallowed every sound except the echo of my own footsteps. I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself that truth mattered. But truth does not pay rent, and it definitely does not protect you when powerful men lose money. I barely made it back to my station before my screen locked itself out. A red banner flashed across it, access revoked. My badge stopped working 10 minutes later. Security did not even bother to pretend. 2 guards walked up to me like I was already gone, one of them avoiding eye contact, the other too stiff, too rehearsed. They told me I was being terminated effective immediately for violating internal compliance protocols. I almost laughed. Compliance. That word had destroyed my life once already, and now it was doing it again. I tried to argue, but the words died in my throat. I knew how this worked. Once your name is flagged, you are done. They walked me out past rows of containers stacked like silent witnesses. The night air hit harder than usual, thick with humidity and something else I could not quite name. Fear, maybe. I clutched my bag tighter than necessary, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. I had a daughter sleeping at home. I could not afford to spiral. I needed to think, to plan, to stay invisible. But invisibility had already been taken from me the moment I opened that door. The ride home felt longer than usual. Every red light stretched into an eternity. I checked my phone 3 times just to make sure it still worked. Messages were gone. Emails wiped. Even my backup cloud access was locked. Whoever moved against me did not waste time. They erased me clean. By the time I reached my apartment complex, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit in the car for a full minute before stepping out. The building looked the same as always, cracked paint, flickering hallway lights, neighbors who kept to themselves because survival here meant minding your own business. I climbed the stairs slowly, listening to each step like it might betray me. Halfway up, I noticed the car. Black, engine off, parked just far enough from the entrance to look casual. It was not from around here. I knew every car that belonged in this lot. This one did not belong. My chest tightened. I kept walking, forcing my breathing to stay even. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. But then I saw the man leaning against the railing near my floor, cigarette burning between his fingers, eyes fixed on me like he had been waiting. He did not move when I passed him. He did not need to. The message was clear. They knew where I lived. Inside my apartment, the silence was heavier than anything outside. My daughter was asleep on the couch, one arm hanging off the edge, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that grounded me for half a second. I locked the door, then checked it again. Windows, curtains, every corner. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to grab her and run, but run where? I had no money, no job, no backup, just fear and a mistake that had grown teeth. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I flinched so hard I almost dropped it. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. No voice, just breathing on the other end. Slow, deliberate. Then the line went dead. I stood there, staring at the screen, feeling something inside me crack. This was not intimidation. This was a countdown. I moved quickly after that, packing a small bag, essentials only. Documents, cash I had hidden, a change of clothes for my daughter. I kept my movements quiet, controlled, even though my pulse was slamming against my ribs. I did not want to wake her yet. Not until I knew what I was doing. Not until I had a plan. But the truth was, I did not have one. I was improvising inside a nightmare. A knock hit the door. Soft. Too soft. Not the kind of knock a neighbor makes. I froze. Every muscle locked in place. The knock came again, slightly louder this time, patient, confident. Whoever was outside was not in a hurry. That scared me more than anything. I stepped closer, each footfall careful, silent. My hand hovered near the lock, then pulled back. No way. I was not opening that door. Not like this. Not without knowing. Then a voice cut through the wood, low, calm, unmistakably controlled. He said my name like he had known it for years. Not shouted, not forced, just stated. That alone made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard and asked who it was, my voice barely holding steady. There was a pause, just long enough to make me regret asking. Then he spoke again. He said, "Open the door." I did not move. Another pause, longer this time. Then footsteps shifted on the other side, followed by a quiet exhale, like he was deciding something. When he spoke again, the tone changed, just slightly, enough for me to hear the warning underneath. "You are not safe anymore." The words landed heavier than any threat. I knew that voice. I had heard it hours ago in that conference room, calm and precise, attached to a man who did not need to raise his volume to command a room. Kong Min-jae was standing outside my apartment, in the rain, while someone else sat in a black car downstairs, waiting to see what happened next. And suddenly, every option I thought I had disappeared. I looked back at my daughter, then at the door, my heart splitting between fear and instinct. If I opened it, I stepped into his world. If I did not, I stayed in theirs. Either way, the life I knew was already gone. I should not have opened the door, but I did. I turned the lock slowly, every click sounding louder than it should, and pulled it open just enough to see him. I should not have opened the door, but I did. I turned the lock slowly, every click sounding louder than it should, and pulled it open just enough to see him. Kang Min-jae stood there under the dim hallway light, rain dripping from the edge of his coat, his hair damp, his expression unreadable in a way that made my chest tighten. He did not look like a man who had just been saved from a financial trap. He looked like a man recalculating everything. His eyes moved past me for a second, scanning the apartment, then settled back on my face. I held his gaze longer than I should have, because I refused to be the first one to look away. Not tonight. Not after everything. I asked him what he was doing here. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped inside without waiting for permission, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt final. The air shifted instantly, like the room had shrunk. I moved between him and the couch where my daughter slept, a reflex I did not even think about. He noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flicked to her, then back to me, and something in his expression changed. Not softer, just more precise. He said I interfered with a transaction that was meant to be invisible. I told him that was the point, that the translation was wrong and he knew it. He did not deny it. That was what scared me. Instead, he said the deal was designed to bind him to cargo that would trigger federal seizure the moment it cleared customs. Not just a loss, a dismantling. Someone wanted him exposed, weakened, forced out of the routes he controlled. I crossed my arms, tried to ground myself in something solid. I told him that sounded like his problem, not mine. He almost smiled at that, but it did not reach his eyes. He said it became my problem the second I spoke in that room. The translator was not working alone. The port was compromised. Systems, personnel, clearance channels. All of it. The kind of operation that required time, money, and people in places that do not show up on any org chart. I felt my stomach drop as pieces started connecting in my head. My access being revoked that fast. My data wiped. The car outside. The man on the stairs. This was not a reaction. It was already in motion before I ever opened my mouth. I told him to leave. I said I did not want any part of whatever war he was in. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I had just said something naive. Then he stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just enough to make me aware of the distance closing. He said there was no version of this where I stayed out of it. The people who set that trap would assume I understood what I interrupted. They would not risk that. They would remove it. Remove me. The word hung there between us, heavy and unspoken. I shook my head, anger pushing through the fear. I told him I had already lost everything once because of people like him. Corporate suits, hidden deals, systems that turn on you the second you stop being useful. I said I survived that by staying quiet, by not getting involved, and I was not about to throw my life away for his. His expression hardened at that, just a fraction. He said I did not survive. I was erased. There is a difference. The words hit harder than I expected, because part of me knew he was right. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time I did not hesitate. I pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. Just a string of numbers at first glance, but my brain recognized the pattern instantly. Container IDs. I froze. My hands went cold. I opened the message fully and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a list. Routes. Timestamps. Cross-dock transfers. And at the bottom, a single line. You should not have listened. I showed him the screen before I could stop myself. His eyes scanned it quickly, his focus sharpening in a way that made everything else in the room feel distant. He asked me where I got it. I said it just came through. He nodded once, almost to himself. Then he said they were moving faster than he expected. I snapped back that I did not care about his expectations. I cared about staying alive long enough to see my daughter grow up. That was the only metric that mattered to me. He took a step back then, giving me space I did not realize I needed. His voice lowered, not softer, but more deliberate. He said if I wanted to stay alive, I needed to understand what I was looking at. Those numbers were not random. They were part of a routing structure designed to mask cargo under humanitarian clearance. 8 shipments from Busan rerouted through secondary ports, relabeled, then pushed inland under protected status. On paper, everything was legal, clean, untouchable. In reality, it was a pipeline. Money, weapons, influence, washed through the one category nobody questions. My head spun as I processed it. I had seen fragments of this before in compliance reports that never made it past internal review. Flags that disappeared, audits that closed themselves. I always thought it was negligence, sloppy oversight. I was wrong. It was intentional, structured, and now I had a front row seat to it. I told him I could not help him, that I was done with systems that eat people alive. He did not argue. He just looked at me, steady, calculating. Then he said something that shifted everything again. He said this was not about helping him. It was about understanding that I was already inside the system they built. And right now, I was the easiest piece to remove. He let that settle before adding one more thing. Unless I became the hardest one to touch. I let out a shaky breath, my mind racing through options that all felt equally impossible. Fight, run, hide. None of them worked alone. I looked at my daughter again, then back at him. I hated that he was right. I hated that the only person telling me the truth was the one I should trust the least. But truth has a way of cutting through everything else when your life is on the line. I asked him what that even meant, becoming hard to touch. His answer came without hesitation. He said it meant knowing more than they did, seeing the system the way it actually worked, not the way it was written. He said I already had an advantage they did not expect. I knew compliance. I knew tracking. I knew how small errors move through large systems unnoticed until it is too late. He paused, then added that I also had something else. I had already proven I was willing to act. I almost laughed at that, but there was no humor in it. Acting had cost me everything in less than an hour. He said it might also be the only reason I was still alive. The thoughts settled into my bones, cold and sharp, because deep down, I knew he was not wrong. The people outside were not waiting to scare me. They were waiting for confirmation, and I had just given it to them. I looked at the message on my phone again, at the pattern hidden in plain sight, and felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, loud and constant, but underneath it, something else started to form. Focus. If this system could be used to trap him, it could be exposed. If it could be exposed, it could be turned. Not to win. Not yet. Just to survive. I met his eyes again, this time with a different question forming in my chest. I asked him if he was telling me the truth because he needed me or because I was already part of his problem. He held my gaze for a second, then answered in a way that made everything colder. He said both. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark while the rain outside faded into a steady drip. Kong stayed near the door, silent, watching everything without seeming to move. I hated that his presence made the room feel safer. I hated it even more because it was true. My daughter stirred once on the couch, mumbling in her sleep, and I froze until her breathing settled again. That was the line I could not cross. Whatever I did next had to keep her alive. Nothing else mattered. I pulled up what I could still access. Not much. Most of my credentials were dead, but they forgot something. They always forget something. Offline cache logs, partial sync files, fragments that never make it into official audits because they are considered redundant. I had spent years working compliance, digging through data that nobody else wanted to see. Patterns, inconsistencies, the kind of quiet errors that tell a bigger story if you know where to look. My fingers moved faster as muscle memory kicked in. I rebuilt pieces of the tracking system from scraps, mapping container flows from Busan into Savannah, then branching outward into inland routes. At first it looked clean. Too clean. That was the first sign it was not. I started overlaying timestamps. That was where it broke. Containers that should have moved in sequence were jumping intervals. Not randomly. Precisely. Like someone was rewriting the timeline, just enough to avoid detection. I zoomed in, isolating a cluster tied to the ID sent to my phone. My pulse picked up as the pattern emerged. Aid shipments, medical supplies, food relief, every label perfect on paper. But the routing paths did not match the declared urgency. They stalled in secondary ports, rerouted through private warehouses, then re-enter the system under adjusted documentation. Clean in, clean out, but in between, something changed. I felt Kong step closer behind me, not touching, just close enough to see the screen. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. I could feel his focus sharpen as the map filled in. I pulled up cross-doc records next, digging into the gaps where data should have been but was not. That was where the real story lived. Missing entries, duplicate seals, weight discrepancies that were too small to trigger alerts but consistent enough to matter. I highlighted them, linking each anomaly back to the original shipment IDs. A network began to form, lines connecting ports, warehouses, and transport companies that did not officially exist on the same chain. My throat went dry. This was not smuggling in the traditional sense. This was integration. Whoever built this did not hide outside the system. They built it into the system itself. Every safeguard accounted for. Every audit anticipated. It was not about avoiding detection. It was about controlling what detection looked like. I leaned back slightly, pressing my fingers against my temples as the realization settled in. This was bigger than Kong. Bigger than one port. This was infrastructure. I whispered that they were not just moving cargo. They were laundering movement, turning restricted shipments into protected ones by passing them through layers nobody questioned. Humanitarian clearance was the perfect cover. No one wants to slow down aid. No one wants to be the reason supplies do not reach people in crisis. So the system trusts it. Blindly, I felt something cold settle in my chest. That trust was the weapon. Kong finally spoke, his voice low, controlled. He asked if I could prove it. I did not answer right away. Proof is a dangerous word. It means exposure. It means consequences. It means stepping into a line of fire you cannot step back from. I stared at the screen, at the web I had just uncovered, and felt the weight of it pressing down on me. Then I nodded, not because I was sure, because I knew there was no other path left. I began extracting everything. Logs, snapshots, routing tables, cross-references. I built a file that did not just show anomalies. It told a story, start to finish. How shipments enter the system, how they were altered, how they exited clean. I layered timestamps, highlighted inconsistencies, annotated every deviation with just enough context to make it undeniable. This was not something that could be brushed aside as error. This was deliberate, structured, illegal in ways that reached far beyond financial crime. My hands shook once, just once, when I realized what I was holding. This was enough to take down anyone connected to it, including people I could not see yet, including people who would not hesitate to erase me if they knew what I had. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing myself to breathe. Fear does not get to decide here. Not anymore. Kong watched me finish, then asked what I planned to do with it. I turned the laptop slightly so he could see the final compilation. I said I was not running. Running would only make me easier to track. Hiding would only delay what was coming. The only way out was through. He studied me for a long second, like he was reassessing the risk I represented. Then he asked where. I pulled up an event listing I had half noticed earlier in the week. A charity gala scheduled downtown. High profile. Public. The kind of place where people like to be seen doing the right thing. My stomach tightened as I opened the details. The hosting organization name hit like a punch. The same foundation tied to multiple shipments in the data I had just mapped. Of course it was. It had to be. They were not just moving cargo through the system. They were legitimizing it in public. I said I was going there. I said I was going to show everything. Not quietly. Not anonymously. Out in the open, where they could not bury it without witnesses. The words sounded insane even as I said them. But they also felt right in a way that scared me. Exposure is the only thing systems like this cannot fully control. Not when it happens in front of the people they rely on to believe them. Kong asked if I understood what that meant. I met his eyes, steady now, even though my heart was still racing. I said it meant they would try to stop me. Before I got there. While I was there. After. It meant there was no going back to anything that resembled a normal life. It meant my daughter's world would change because of a decision she did not make. The weight of that nearly broke me. Nearly. I looked at her again, sleeping, unaware of how close everything had come to falling apart. Then I looked back at the screen, at the truth sitting there waiting to be used or buried. I could not unsee it. I could not pretend it was not real. And I could not let the people who built it decide whether I lived or disappeared. He asked me one last time if I was sure. I felt the fear, the doubt, the instinct to protect what little I had left. Then I pushed it down hard. I said yes, not because I was brave, because I was already trapped. And if I was going to be hunted either way, I would rather be hunted for telling the truth than for knowing it and doing nothing. I closed the laptop slowly, the sound final in the quiet room. Tomorrow was no longer an option. It was a deadline. I walked into that gala knowing I might not walk out. The building glowed with polished glass and soft gold light, the kind that makes people feel important just for being inside. I wore the only clean dress I had. Simple, dark, forgettable, which was exactly what I needed until it was time not to be. People laughed around me. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. Everyone looked perfect. That was the point. No one comes to a charity event expecting to witness a crime. That is why it works so well. I kept my head down at first, moving through the crowd like I belonged there. Kong stayed out of sight, but I could feel the weight of his presence somewhere in the room. Not protection. Not exactly. Just awareness. My fingers tightened around the small drive in my hand. Everything I had built overnight lived on that piece of plastic. Every lie, every route, every name hidden between the lines. My heart beat, so hard I thought someone might hear it over the music. The stage lit up as the host took the microphone, smiling wide, talking about impact, about hope, about lives saved because of their work. The same foundation name echoed through the room, wrapped in applause. I felt something inside me snap into place. This was it. No more waiting. No more second-guessing. I moved forward before I could stop myself, each step louder in my head than it actually was. A staff member tried to block me near the stage, but I slipped past, already reaching for the control panel I had spotted earlier. For a split second, I hesitated. Not because I doubted the truth, because I understood the cost. Then I thought about my daughter, about the message on my phone, about the men waiting for me to disappear quietly. I pressed the button. The screen behind the host flickered, then changed. The polished presentation vanished, replaced by raw data. Container IDs, routes, timestamps. The room went silent so fast it felt like the air had been pulled out. I grabbed the microphone before anyone could react and forced my voice steady. I said this was not charity. I said it was a pipeline. I walked them through it, piece by piece, showing how aid shipments were rerouted, altered, used to move things no one wanted to question. I did not rush. I did not shout. I let the truth sit there, heavy and undeniable. Faces changed as understanding spread. Confusion turned into shock. Shock into fear. Someone yelled for security. Too late. I had already sent the file to every major contact list I could access before stepping on that stage. Phones lit up across the room as notifications came in. There was no putting it back. Then the doors opened. Not security. Federal agents. Fast, controlled, unmistakable. They moved straight toward the people who had been smiling moments ago, hands tightening, voices rising. The host tried to speak, to regain control, but it collapsed under the weight of what was already out. I stepped back from the microphone, my hands trembling now that it was done. Kong appeared beside me, silent, watching everything unfold with that same unreadable calm. This time, there was something else in it. Not approval. Not relief. Recognition. The system had been exposed, but it was not destroyed. Not yet. That would take time. Consequences always do. Later, after the noise faded and statements were taken, I stood outside under the same kind of lights that had once made me feel small. The port was still there, still moving, still hiding things in plain sight. But I was not the same person walking through it anymore. My name had been cleared. The old accusation buried under something far bigger. That should have felt like victory. It did not. Not completely. Because I knew what it cost. Safety. Anonymity. The illusion that staying quiet could protect me. I looked down at my phone, at a message from my daughter asking when I was coming home, and felt the weight of everything settle in. I only corrected one sentence, but it exposed an entire lie. I used to think staying quiet was the safest way to survive. Keep your head down. Fix what you can. Do not get involved. But the truth is, silence only protects the people who built the lie. The moment I spoke up, I lost everything I thought I needed and found out what actually mattered. Not comfort, not safety, but the line I refused to let anyone cross, especially when it came to my child. So let me ask you this. If you were in my place, knowing the risk, knowing the cost, would you still choose to expose it all? If this story pulled you in, do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a like if you believe truth is worth the risk. And tell me in the comments, would you stay silent, or would you do exactly what I did?